Hi, this is Julie with an invitation for you before we begin. On December 1st, Mother's Quest will be celebrating its 5th birthday. To honor this milestone, we are having a virtual celebration with poetry, music, toasts, and more. If you've been impacted by Mother's Quest and have wishes to share for our next chapter, I'd love for you to join us. Email hello@mothersquest.com to get all the details and RSVP. Now, onto a very powerful episode with a special co host, my son, Ryan Neale.
Hi, and welcome to Mother's Quest, a podcast for moms like me ready to live our own truly epic life. I'm Julie Lythcott-Haims, a life and leadership coach, community builder, writer, and mom to 2 high-energy boys who challenge me to grow into my best self. I'll be right there. Where was I?
Hello, and welcome to a special episode of the Mother's Quest podcast that I'm extremely grateful for, just in time for Thanksgiving, featuring the amazing Julie Lythcott-Haims and my 17-year-old son, Ryan Neale. Julie is an incredible mother to 2, a former Stanford dean and New York Times bestselling author of the anti-helicopter parenting manifesto, How to Raise an Adult, which gave rise to a TED Talk that has more than 5 million views. Her second book is the critically acclaimed and award-winning prose poetry memoir, Real American, which illustrates her experience as a Black and biracial person in white spaces. I'm so fortunate to have had the opportunity to interview Julie for the podcast several years ago when that book was first released. When I heard about Julie's new book, Your Turn: How to Be an Adult, I knew I wanted to invite her back to the podcast again. And I hoped that my son Ryan, on the threshold of adulthood himself, would join us in the conversation. The stars aligned and Ryan was available the day of the interview, enabling Julie, Ryan, and I to explore the concepts of her book about navigating adulthood and embracing our differences, especially our neurodiversity, in deeply personal and relevant ways. Before I share more about my takeaways and Julie's special challenge for us, I want to introduce a former podcast guest and fellow mother on a quest, Deborah Reber of the Tilt Parenting Podcast, for this episode's dedication.
Hey there, I'm Debbie Reber, the founder of Tilt Parenting, which is a community and resource for parents and caregivers raising neurodivergent, or what I refer to as differently wired children. I'm so honored to be doing a dedication for this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast. I just need to put it out there right away. I'm not exaggerating when I say that Julie Lythcott-Haims is truly one of my favorite humans I get to be in relationship with. I am honored to call Julie a friend and am repeatedly struck by and learned from the way she shows up as a parent, colleague, mentor, and human with vulnerability, boldness, compassion, humor, and generosity. Julie is a truth-telling game changer, and if you're new to her work, I'm sure you'll agree with me when you're done listening to this conversation that she is someone whose work and words and presence makes the world a better place. Because of my own role as the mother of a neurodivergent teenager just a few years away from launching, and the work that I do supporting other mothers who are raising and launching people who don't neatly fit into any box, I especially appreciate the lengths that Julie went to be inclusive of the experience of neurodivergent humans in her incredible new book, Your Turn. This is how the revolution for changing the landscape of school and work and society for differently wired humans happens, by normalizing difference and by showing intersectional experiences on the page in respectful and thoughtful ways. Thank you, Julie, for all that you do, and thank you, Julie Neale, for having this important conversation. I also want to dedicate this episode to all of the moms out there who are bravely raising their own neurodivergent kids, many of whom are discovering their own neurodivergence in the process, and who feel overwhelmed by the uncertainty and unknowns of their child's path, but keep showing up anyway. Every single day, I get to connect with mothers, including you, Julie Neale, who are leaning into their discomfort, doing their own deep inner work so their own fears and worries don't get tangled up with their kids' experience, and parent from a deep place of knowing that being differently wired does not equal being broken or in need of fixing. So thank you again, Julie, for inviting me to do this dedication. Conversations like these fill me with so much optimism and hope.
Thank you, Deborah, for this heartfelt dedication honoring Julie and other mothers raising neurodivergent children. I could not agree with you more about what an exceptional human Julie is, about the power of her commitment to put the stories of a diverse group of young people with different identities on the pages of her book, and about the impact of her work for normalizing and honoring differences. As you hear our conversation unfold, I know you'll be struck as I was by Julie's wisdom and humility as she talks with Ryan, helping him to understand that he deserves to be cherished for who he is, that he can approach things like writing in ways that work for his differently wired mind, and that he can seek out environments like college that enable him to play to his strengths and allow him to thrive. Since our conversation, Ryan was able to take Julie's advice to heart, using voice to text without shame to write his personal statement for college, and sharing his personal insights on a panel at the recent Stanford Neurodiversity Summit. You can follow the link in the show notes to listen. Finally, this conversation is a demonstration that there is no destination to becoming an adult, but an ongoing journey of learning and discovery, that parents and their children can support one another in reciprocity with curiosity, and that we can all benefit from asking ourselves the question from Mary Oliver's famous poem that Julie gives us as our challenge. What is it that we want to do with our one wild and precious life? As we approach Thanksgiving and the 5-year birthday of the launch of Mother's Quest, I can say there is nothing I'd rather do than hold space for a conversation like this one and share it with you. I'm Julie Neale, and this is Mother's Quest. Julie, welcome back to the Mother's Quest podcast. I am so honored to have you here today and to have the honor of leading this interview with my son, Ryan. So welcome, Ryan.
Hi, happy to be here.
And hi, Ryan and Julie. Thank you, Julie, for having me back. You have such a great podcast. I love being with your community. And what fun it is to be with Ryan as well. I can't wait for this conversation.
So full disclosure, I anticipate that I might cry at various points during this conversation.
Awesome.
I already am filled with so much gratitude at the incredible vehicle that is this podcast and how it has brought me to people like you and created opportunities for my kids. And I just could not ask for a greater opportunity to reflect on what it means to try to become an adult with my son, 17, who's on the threshold of adulthood. So this is just absolutely fabulous.
And I am in this place of wonder, newly authoring this book on adulting. My own kids are 22 and about to be 20. And I'm just super interested in the journey for all of us, and particularly for young people emerging from home, emerging from high school, emerging out into whatever may come. And so I'm just super excited for how you want to craft this conversation.
So let's get started. Typically, I ask my guests to share a little bit about their childhood and the impact that their mother had on them. But you and I had an amazing conversation on the podcast already. So I will link to the show notes and encourage people to make sure that they listen to part 1 of what could be a 2-part Julie Lythcott-Haims experience. And instead, I want to jump straight into more about your quest. And I want you to tell us about how your quest came to write this book about adulting.
Oh my goodness. For 10 years, my job was to care about other people's young adults. I was the dean of freshmen at Stanford University, which is right up the street from me. And my job was to listen to them, to try to listen for the fears embedded in the questions, to try to listen for the dreams embedded in the questions, to root for them, to listen to that inner voice when so many other voices in their head were telling them what they ought to do or had to do or should do to meet societal approval, parental approval, peer approval. I just was rooting for that individual to become themselves, whatever that meant for that person. So at the same time, I was raising my own kids. As I've said, they're 22 and almost 20. And so I care, of course, viscerally, deeply in my soul, in my bones about Sawyer and Avery. And so I come from this dual vantage point of having been employed to care deeply about other people's young adult children, and then having my own two who are of my flesh and blood. And I'm really clear that we're all learning and growing, or should be, until we take our last breath. That is one of my mantras about my own life at age 53. I am interested in continuing to learn and grow. Therefore, it's not about perfection. It's not about arrival at a place of completion or accomplishment. It is a process. It is a journey. We're never done. And that's great. I think I find that liberating. And I am actively repatterning as much as I am an expert of some sort, having written some books on these topics. I am learning and growing in the spaces in which I write. And so, in Your Turn, my new book on living your best life as an adult, I acknowledge that I have learned that there were times when I didn't see my son, Sawyer, in the struggles he was having in adolescence around anxiety, around ADHD, for example, and only came to realize that when he was in college and things were kind of taking a downward spiral. And on the pages of the book, I acknowledge, hey, I failed to see my kid fully as he was. I just kept seeing the future I had in mind for him, that I needed for him, that I wanted for him, but also kind of needed for myself, I think. And so I overlooked some of these intrinsic things, ADHD and anxiety, that are real obstacles for him, and underserved my son. And I put that, it's one of the most painful things to admit to myself, to my son. But of course, having admitted it, now I am released from much of the shame of it. And now I'm in the place of, what do I do about it? And one of my ways of trying to do something about it was to put that story, a longer version of what I've just said, in the pages of this book. And I even say in the book, if you need somebody in your life to see this, flag this page. In other words, if you are the young adult reading and you've got a situation, a diagnosis or a challenge or a difference or what have you, that you feel the people who, are your closest allies, your parents, your guardians, whomever, they don't quite get, flag this page. Because my son said to me, when my husband and I finally started leaning into learning about anxiety and ADHD, and he saw the books we were reading when he came home from college, end of sophomore year, he put his hand on my shoulder looking at these 5 books, all flagged with Post-it notes. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Mom, thank you for taking an interest in understanding who I am." And oh my God, talk about tears, Julie. My God. I thought I had always understood him. I wanted to understand him. I love my children fiercely, but I had managed not to see him, particularly around these deeply embedded challenges. And so I'm trying to help other parents not make those mistakes. I'm trying to help young adults know that if that has happened, that has happened to other people, and that they have the right to say, please slow down. Please try to understand what I'm going through. You can be of greatest help to me, parent, if you love and accept me as I am.
The tears are already flowing over here. Oh my God. Go ahead, Ray.
Well, as someone familiar with the diagnosis community, let's just say, I remember I read that chapter, Take Care of Yourself, I believe it's called.
Yep, take good care.
Take good care, which specifically resonated with me in that section. I love the way you highlighted how your son Sawyer said, "Thank you for learning about me. Thank you for making me feel seen."
Yeah.
Because we live in a society where people with neurological differences don't often feel seen, where it's maybe not societally accepted to accept yourself, to communicate with parents, adults in your life about challenges you have. And I hope that someone of Sawyer's background will read this book and say, wow, I feel seen in these pages. I don't feel like I'm just failing to live up to the expectations of my society. Here's this incredibly smart and educated Stanford dean who is saying there are kids with problems like these, and I'm committed to understanding them and being there for them. And I hope the world does too. And I hope a lot of good can come from words like these.
Ryan, how beautiful. Thank you for that. Do you want to say more about? Yeah, I loved your language as a member of the diagnosis community. I love that. And I just want to make space for you to say whatever you might want to say. You don't have to, of course, about yourself in regard to what we've just been talking about.
Well, yes, thank you for offering me this space. So, for those of you who do not know, my name is Ryan Neale. I was diagnosed with autism at an early age, along with anxiety, and I am highly suspicious that I have some form of ADHD. And these diagnostic categories have been a big part of me throughout my life. However, along the way, I've received subliminal messages from society that the way my brain naturally thinks isn't quote unquote right. So I embarked on this mission to be as normal as possible, whether it's spending hours in middle school holed up in my room, watching hours upon hours of comedy shows to learn what the sarcasm thing is, to working so hard at basketball that I'll be accepted for my skills rather than having to fit in on a team of boys, which may not necessarily fit with who I am as a person. And this constant struggle to be liked and be accepted has caused me a lot of pain, I will freely admit. So if authorities and authors like you are giving us a space to be authentically who we are without shame, I think to really be seen, hopefully there will be less kids who feel like they have to be a certain way rather than just being who they are.
Good Lord, Ryan. That was so beautiful. I'm so grateful that you shared all that. And Julie, right now, I don't even know what is going on for you because I presume you've heard Ryan say this, but that was so clear. That is, I've never met you before, and you have given me imagery that's allowing me to, like, the hour upon hour watching comedy shows so that you could figure out this sarcasm thing is such an exquisite way to illustrate a very particular challenge and wanting to fit in with the boys and play basketball so well that that's what makes you fit, even though you may not, quote unquote, fit in ways that are more traditional or neurotypical.
Yeah.
And it caused you a lot of pain. And I just want to say, yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for the pain. And boy, are you impressive. You are very self-aware, and that is such a beautiful thing. And I'm glad you were born when you were and not 10 years earlier and not 20 years earlier, because believe it or not, it was worse then. And we are in an era of recognizing that there is no such thing as normal, that being twice exceptional is amazing, and being neurodivergent, neurodiverse, neuroatypical is a fact, not something to be ashamed of. That is all a relatively new set of appreciations as folks have studied neuroscience, as more and more kids like you, and of course, no one is exactly like you, but kids who have similar challenges or differences have emerged in our world, and we're better at diagnosing, and we're better at supporting, and we're better at understanding. Your voice can be heard, Ryan, around these issues more clearly than ever before, I think, in modern human history, at least. Do you know the book Normal Sucks by Jonathan Mooney?
Not personally, but I already love the title.
I'm going to send you a copy. It's Normal Sucks, How to Live, Learn, and Thrive Outside the Lines. And it's just, I think you'll dig it. In the confessional and often hilarious Normal Sucks, a neurodiverse writer, advocate, and father mediates on his life, offering the radical message that we should stop trying to fix people and start empowering them to succeed.
I have heard Jonathan Mooney speak, and if I believe I'm correct, I think that he's also dyslexic, among other things. And, you know, in addition to my amazing son, Ryan, I also have an 8-year-old equally unique, neurodiverse, and incredible in his own ways. We discovered last summer that he's dyslexic and has dysgraphia. And so in our household, Chris and I are constantly doing what you're still doing, Julie. So I'm so glad that you named it. I can have a Mother's Quest podcast and be mindful and thoughtful and talk to incredible people like you who teach me and still come up against my own ableism, my own inability to recognize or see how things are challenging for my boys in different ways. And I've also uncovered and discovered my own neurodivergence in the process, which I think happens for a lot of parents supporting their kids along the way. We start to recognize that things that we've always struggled with are actually about being different. So I've been releasing my own shame and trying to come into proactive strategies as I've been trying to champion and better understand my kids.
That's so beautiful. I think I'm on a similar journey. I'm 53, Julie. How old are you? Do you say publicly how old you are? I know many women don't.
I'm very open. So
Okay.
I'm turning 50 in December.
Okay.
And I've named this my year of becoming 50.
I love it. All right. And it just gets better. And that's reminded me of a phrase I wanted to say to Ryan, which is, believe it or not, kid, it is going to get better once you emerge out of childhood and high school and all of the strictures of that. You will have greater agency to choose environments where you can be cherished, because Ryan Neale, you deserve to be cherished. So you can choose school environments, work environments, neighborhoods, relationships where you are cherished as you are. And that is available. There are places where you won't be cherished. I don't share the particular diagnoses that you have, but I'm a Black and biracial person, and there are places where I'm not cherished. But the older I have gotten, I have learned, but there are places where I can be simply myself and know that that is enough. And that relief comes, and then the joy comes. So that's what awaits you. I mean, I'm not trying to presume that childhood has been awful, but I know you have amazing parents, of course, and yet you've said you have some of these things have caused you a lot of pain. And the older you get, the more you will be able to process the pain and construct ways of being for yourself so that you're in environments where you can simply be you. And that is fantastic.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That's definitely something I'm looking forward to, especially as I'm looking forward to college. And I also hope that even if there are non-neurodiverse people listening, there's still environments where you can feel belonging versus not. And I mean, everyone's different in their own ways. So I hope that whoever's listening keeps in mind trying to find where they belong and going for it. You only have one life, right?
That's right. That's absolutely right.
So through my tears, I want to move us to starting to talk a little bit more about the book. I think you know, Julie, that I have this epic framework, which is both a metaphor for living the kind of life where we are the author of our story, where we are continually growing and pursuing our dreams and doing all the things that we've been talking about so far. EPIC is also an acronym mnemonic for these guideposts that I think help us to live our life when we're raising our kids. So Ryan and I are going to loosely use the guideposts to direct some of our questions for you. And Ryan's got the first one connected to E, engaging mindfully with our children.
All right. So within the EPIC guideposts, the first one is E, engage specifically mindfully with our children, which I think is especially timely given that you wrote an entire book designed to engage young adults and becoming adults exactly as they are, wherever they are in their life. I remember at the beginning of the Take Good Care chapter, you mentioned that there's no way for you as an author to know everything about the intricate tapestry of life that is an individual child. Yet you made your best effort to meet them as they are and give advice that could be applied evenly to everyone, regardless of where they've come from. So with that said, I want to ask, what revelations parents can take from the book and that chapter specifically in terms of supporting their kids and meeting them where they are?
Thanks, Ryan. I think the revelation, frankly, just goes back to what we've been talking about, which is that, as Jonathan Mooney says, normal sucks, or that there is no way of being, way of learning, thinking. There is no body type or mind type that is normal, that the human community is incredibly diverse across so many dimensions. And that is a facet, it's a truth, it's a facet of life. And we need to get that. We need to accept it. We need to embrace it. And for parents, there's often sadness that our child that we dreamed of, that we conceived, that we brought into our family, that is now here. There can be sadness when the child doesn't seem to be headed in the direction we had hoped. Maybe we wanted our child to be a ballet dancer and they just don't have that body type. Or maybe we wanted our child to be a certain type of thinker and they just don't seem to have aptitude in that manner or in that subject. Whatever it is, often we have expectations. We have an image of who our child will be. And when we desperately need that to eventuate, that can turn into real conflict. It can mean we don't love our child unconditionally. We love them conditionally. We love them when they sort of fit the mold or fit the image we had hoped for. I remember I met a prominent football coach who had a child who was so clearly not destined for football. And you could just see the anguish that the child felt in the presence of the dad, and the dad felt regarding his child. And my heart just wept, mostly for the child, but also for the dad, because none of us want to feel that way. Sad for him that he was failing to see his son for who his son was, but more sad even for the son. So I think engaging mindfully with our children is, in part, not trying to own who they are or craft who they should be, but simply with mindfulness, being curious about who they are and humble about our own right to craft it's not humble, it's sort of respectful. Like, you are you, this is your life. I'm lucky to get to be older and alongside you to make sure that you stay safe until you can keep yourself safe. I mean, that's parenting. And so it's a humble curiosity, it's a gentleness, it's a profound respect for the individual.
That is so beautiful. I'm really appreciating that. And also how much this evolution of your thought leadership really builds on everything else that you've done, your TED Talk and your previous book, which we will link to and encourage people to explore as well.
Thanks, Julie.
I'm going to move us to the next guidepost, P, which stands for passionate and purposeful impact. One of the things I love about the book is the way that you weave in these deeply personal stories from young people who you interviewed. I'm wondering if you could choose a story or two that you think really illuminates how to help young adults figure out what steps to take, whether it's choosing their college or choosing the first job after college. What did you learn about stepping into our impact?
Well, I did choose to put all kinds of other folks in these pages because I wanted readers, no matter what their background is, in terms of what is the term for, if I'm trying to use a term for neurodivergent, neurodiverse, and neurotypical all at once in order to describe sort of way people think, is there an overarching term that I should be using?
Neuro everyone.
Neuro everyone, right? Exactly.
We're coining a new term.
Right. So neuro everyone is in this book, and people who are raised in working class and poor backgrounds and middle class and upper middle class and highly educated and hardly educated and across the racial spectrum, across the gender spectrum, people who have different sexual orientations, right? It's just all kinds of people are in this book. And one story that comes to mind is that of an artist named Zuri, who's actually an actor now in LA in season 3 of a popular TV show called Good Trouble. But Zuri's in one of my earliest chapters, Tag Your It, the terror and joy of fending for yourself. And Zuri's in there because Zuri struggled to become an actor. Zuri graduated from Spelman and HBCU, came out to LA to make her fortune as an actor, was a nanny and a yoga instructor. And those two jobs were not enough to pay rent and basic bills. So she was also on food stamps. She was really hustling, and she was going to auditions and dealing with LA traffic and not getting gigs. And finally, she got this offer to be on this TV show. And now we know the show has succeeded and it's in season 3, but this was at the front end when she'd just gotten cast. And somebody in her network got wind of the fact, oh, wow, Zuri's going to be on this show, and said, let's go to lunch. So they went to lunch, and Zuri was still dealing with food stamps, and she hadn't been paid yet. She'd just been cast, Zuri ordered a salad and a drink, and this other person ordered everything. And then when the bill came, it was clear that the other person expected Zuri to pay because Zuri was the successful actress. But the point was, she wasn't yet, right? She wasn't yet living the life of the actor with money. And she was so bewildered. What do I do? And so for Zuri, the lesson was she ended up compromising. It was awkward. And she ended up saying, I'm not able to cover you. I'm sorry, but maybe we could split it, which was still far more than Zuri would have chosen to spend if it had been up to her entirely. And she learned from that being an adult is partly being able to set boundaries and say no. And I was just blown away that she had learned that at 30 or 28 or whatever she was, because I'm still learning that at 53. I really have a hard time asking for what I need and saying no, because I'm a people pleaser and I'm working on that. So she had this clarity around, if I am to be the person I dream of being, which includes being financially stable, I have to be really good at not letting someone else violate my boundaries around ordering a meal that they then expect me to pay for. There was such clarity and wisdom in it. So she's somebody who comes to mind. I wanted people to hear that voice early on in the book, as I think it's an overlooked area. We don't realize that saying no is a skill and a tool, an ability we want to have access to. We don't want to always be saying no, but too many of us are saying yes or maybe when we really want to be saying no. And it's important to try to work on that sooner rather than later.
Ryan, do you want to respond to that and then move into the next question?
Yes, of course. I'm sorry. I used to be better at thinking on my feet.
No worries at all.
You're doing great. And we have all the time. Well, we don't have all the time in the world, but we have a moment for you to take it in.
First of all, I remember that you wrote a book before this one about kind of combating helicopter parenting and allowing kids to grow up and coming to themselves on their own. And I thought there was an interesting connection between that and Zuri's experience, where if she wasn't fighting for her life for all these years and fending for herself, she wouldn't have came across the lesson of setting boundaries, learning to say no, being confident in herself and who she was. If she was surrounded by too strong of a support network, perhaps then she wouldn't have come across that lesson.
Beautiful. I really appreciate that. Absolutely illustrating that. Too strong of a support network can definitely undermine. It's weird because we think support is always good, but support can lead to an undermining of our skills if there's too much. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right in connecting those things. Thanks for that.
You're welcome. I want to pivot over to in Epic, investing in ourselves, just coming off the heels of Zuri investing in herself and making her strides into her adulthood. Coming from an adult, writing a book about being an adult, I was curious as to maybe what lessons you gained from the writing process, because writing, of course, isn't just for the readers, it's for yourself too.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have constructed this book in 3 parts. It's sort of a genre mashup. It's a self-help book. It's on human development, but I tell my advice in 3 formats. One is the stories of other people like Zuri and about 30 other people. 2 is self-help tips, which are lists, 12 things you should do, 9 things you should, steps, 16 things, whatever. There are lists in many of these chapters because a lot of people learn from lists. A lot of people learn from stories, trying to acknowledge that by having this genre mashup. But then I have personal narrative in the page, my own stories about my own journey. And I think the lesson I learned, it was actually in the chapter called How to Cope When the You Know What Hits the Fan. I realized, Ryan, for the first time, that there had been a set of years from the time I was 21 to 26 where I had survived a pretty scary earthquake experience, learned my father was terminally ill with cancer, started law school at a very prestigious, elite, rigorous place, gotten engaged and married, lost my brother unexpectedly, died out of the blue, and then lost my father to the terminal cancer. And I hadn't processed any of it. I was just this type A person who was making her way, succeeding, air quotes, according to some standards, but just all of this unprocessed fear and grief were within my body. And I didn't realize that until I set out to write this chapter to help other people cope when bad things happen, because bad things will always happen. Life is chaotic. There is so much out of our control. Most of it is out of our control. It's really, okay, how do I respond in the face of this bad thing? That will how well did I respond? What did I learn? How did I support myself? From whom did I seek help and guidance? That really becomes the measure of the quality of our life. And so here I am trying to give people advice, and I'm writing it during a pandemic, which was also hard because I was struggling. So the pandemic became this meta thing like, oh, hey, reader, I'm trying to support you on your journey, and I'm struggling on mine right now because it's a pandemic, but I'm going to keep going while also looking after myself, which is a very sort of meta rule of this book. Keep going, just be kind to yourself and try your best. So what I learned was, as I was trying to explicate what grief looks like and how grief can take over and render you immobile, I actually unpacked so much more of my own grief. I had never linked up that all those 5 or 6 things happened. I thought my grief had only been about losing my dad and my brother, but I realized I was desperately scared in that earthquake, desperately scared, and had never told the truth of that to myself. So putting it on the page was this self-discovery. It's like, oh, hey, look at that. Wow, all these years later, I finally came to terms with that. And that, of course, I discovered the relief of it. Like, wow, I'm able to say I was scared. I'm not ashamed to say I was scared. I'm not embarrassed. I feel like that's the truth of it. And I'm so glad in trying to serve others, I was able to serve myself.
Those were some powerful lessons. I'm glad you came about them. And I'm glad that you were able to leave them on the pages of your book too, because for all you know, there were plenty of young adults who have their own grief they're trying to process. And hopefully you can take some solace in that you may have saved them years of living in the limbo state you described. Maybe you helped them process it earlier.
Yeah.
Of course, in the same way that if I'm able to go about my journey, I can help prevent neurodiverse kids like myself from feeling like they have to be someone they're not. It's about helping people in our circumstances to live a better life than we did. So I'm inspired by the story that you told.
I'm inspired by your analysis. Thank you for that.
I'm inspired by your thank you.
Inspiration all around. Before we move to the next and last guidepost, I want to stay on this question for just a minute, or stay on the concept of putting it on the page. I noticed that you use that term a lot, Julie, and Ryan is a writer at heart and a communicator, as we can all experience listening to him. And he has aspirations and goals about being able to share his stories in a way that can help people, and struggles to make a commitment to a writing practice or to actually get the words on the page. Do you have any words of wisdom for him from your own journey as a writer about how to help move through any resistance or challenges about getting those words on the page?
I love that you're asking this, Julie. And I need to ask Ryan if all of that sounded accurate to Ryan.
Sounds pretty darn accurate.
Okay, good. I assumed, but I'm trying to model for all of us. that we parents can have a sense of my kid's a writer at heart, a communicator, amazing, wants to write a book, struggles to make a commitment. And I wanted to honor the possibility that your mom was seeing you in a way that you weren't seeing yourself and really wanting to center you as a person who's being talked about. And this goes back to engaging mindfully with our children, right?
Yeah.
You're not my child, but I'm trying to engage mindfully with you, right? Okay.
And thank you.
Beautiful
That's
modeling.
rare, especially in adults.
Right. Right. Yes. And it's easy for me to do it with you, Ryan, but believe me, with my own kids, I'm often just, oh, she wants to do this. He wants to do that. So anyway, I wanted to just check and model that. Julie, I appreciate, that I wasn't presuming that you were putting words in Ryan's mouth, but I was really trying to model that for listeners.
I think that's so beautiful. And just before you go, I want to say that I think that's something that, if we don't have a Julie Lythcott-Haims in our corner, that parents can do. So, if I just described that to Ryan and I'm saying, how can we help you move through this? I could actually stop and say, first, Ryan, does what I just said resonate with you? Was there anything
accurate? Yeah.
Anything different about how you see it?
Okay. So now to the actual question. So the first thing you need to know is I'm listening to you now for 40 minutes and I am so impressed with your use of language and your synthesis. So hats off to you, kid. Number two, I was not a writer until I was 44. I was told I didn't write well, and I didn't. I didn't read well because I think I have an undiagnosed learning disability. Frankly, I come from that generation where we weren't often attended to around learning differences. And so I didn't read for pleasure as a kid, which meant I didn't write well because if you don't read a lot, you don't appreciate the vast set of ways in which words can be crafted and placed next to each other on the page. And I listened well in order to do well in school because reading was hard. I just listened really intently, just like you were focusing on the comedy shows to try to understand this thing called sarcasm. I was listening to my teacher and to every single classmate so that I could learn from other people's comments and questions what it was that I was supposed to be taking away from books that I had a hard time getting through. Anyway, so I applaud you for knowing early that you like writing, that you like communicating, and that you're interested in honing that further. In terms of the practice of struggling to get the words down, I wonder if you've played around with a voice recorder so that you can riff orally and then get that transcribed onto the page. That is it the thinking of the ideas that you would want to write about that's tough, or is it getting them down on your laptop or on a piece of paper that's tough?
Definitely getting them down, I would say. If there was a way to magically translate my thoughts on the paper, I would have written books by now.
Yeah, right. So things like Dragon Dictation, I don't want to presume you don't know what I'm talking about. Do you know about dictation software?
I'm aware, but I don't know it like super
Well, the reason I'm going there is I've heard other people say that this is valid. You're clearly, look, here we are, off the cuff, engaging. Your language is fluid, flowing, really beautiful, rich. So I'm feeling that you have access to a lot of great language in oral communication context. So I'm looking for a bridge from that to the page. So if you were to get some software or just a handheld voice recorder that then someone else could listen to and transcribe if they were willing, or if you could hire somebody to do that, it might be a way to just say, look, all right, what's this book that I want to write? What would chapter 1 be? Or what are the best 5 stories that I would want to put in this book? And tell them out loud and let the typing happen at the hands of a software program or somebody else. And then you could look back at that and read it and get some sense of satisfaction, like, wow, look what I just wrote. And it is written, even though it came out of your mouth instead of through your hands, it's writing. And it might be a way to surprise you with the volume of what you are able to write if it goes oral to text. So that's one very specific suggestion. Another totally different suggestion is set yourself, you strike me as somebody who is good at setting goals, making commitments, and seeing what you can do to adhere to them. And a tiny little writing practice of, you know what, no matter what, 20 minutes every day, I'm going to create myself, I'm going to set a space, whether it's handwriting or laptop or whatever, I'm going to just 20 minutes and I'm going to set a timer. And whatever comes, comes. And maybe nothing happens. And I'm just trying to not let other distractions get in my way. I'm going to put my phone in the other room. I'm going to try to set myself up for success for 20 minutes and every single day for 3 weeks. And if literally nothing comes and you could have a few prompts, like these books that I've said I would have written if I didn't have the struggle, like what are the topics? What are the characters? What are the stories? And even just listing them in bullet format. Forget that it wants to be a book. Forget that it wants to be chapters or paragraphs, just jotting down, just stream of consciousness, maybe giving yourself a break. Like I'm going to free write whatever comes to mind. I'm going to sit almost in a mindfulness sense. I'm going to sit here with my laptop or my piece of paper or my journal, whatever the form is, the medium is, and just free write whatever comes to my mind. I'm going to write it down without judgment. I'm just going to let my mind dictate what is going to be written. And that might just loosen you up a little bit.
Well, thank you for sharing these insights with me, really. And of course, the listeners too. Both of these suggestions I've heard from various different sources in one way or another. No. I'm not trying to devalue what you're saying. I'm just giving a little bit of context.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad.
What was the end of that thought, Ryan?
Sorry.
The first one about the voice dictation, I will admit I've had some resistance, partly because of where I am in my own journey of accepting myself and my neurodivergence. There's a sense, especially in the academic community and just at large, of quote unquote grinding, pushing through your barriers. Just the notion of you can sit down and write and just knock it all out. Stories of these writers sitting down and typing it and overcoming these mental barriers. And I feel like that's what I should do. I am a writer. I should sit down and write. And if I do voice to text, I am not as strong as these people who are sitting down and writing. And that is definitely from the internalized ableism that I've felt. So hopefully I can get to the point when I could write in my own way without feeling the sense of guilt, but that's definitely something I'm working through.
Thank you for sharing that. And if I may offer a thought here, there are so many folks who quite literally cannot use their hands and are writers. So there is no rule that it is only valid writing if it came from your hands to the page or to the laptop. And to hell with anyone who feels differently.
To hell with them. Amen.
Amen.
We're at our last guidepost C, which is connected to a strong support network so that we realize that we don't have to be on our journeys alone. And I feel like what we just were exploring was a bit of a departure, but it was such a beautiful modeling of adulting. Ryan, of you being vulnerable, of you being open to feedback, and Julie, you mentoring in the most incredible way. So I guess what I want to ask here just is, Julie, what would be the biggest takeaway that you learned in your research and in your own journey writing the book about how to be vulnerable and connected and open to the support of others so that you don't have to feel alone?
Well, a different story is coming to mind from much later in the book. It's the story of Ashley, who is in chapter 7, Start Talking to Strangers. Humans are key to your survival. Ashley, as a young adult, realized she didn't know how to deal with human conflict. She looks back on her childhood and sees that she had a very loving mom who kind of stepped in whenever anything went bad. An interpersonal situation with a friend, a difficulty with a coach, mom always stepped in and kind of handled it. And mom died toward the end of Ashley's college experience. And so Ashley is kind of out in the world. She was raised by a single parent to start with, kind of felt pretty alone and moved to new places in pursuit of grad school and work, and kept moving out when she had disagreements with roommates or housemates. There'd be a conflict over chores or some other types of expectations, or there'd be a misunderstanding, and she'd move out. And she noticed this pattern, like, I keep leaving. And finally, she was in a situation where there was a disagreement, 5 people, 6 people living in a house. The head guy who'd kind of been living there for years, and while everyone else was kind of rotating in and out, got frustrated with her about the fact that she didn't do the agreed upon chore. And she was getting ready to move. And one of the other roommates basically said, hey, you don't have to move, you can just talk to him. And Ashley was like, how do I talk to him? And the intervening roommate, basically role modeled it. Well, the best thing to do is go and say, look, I know that we've had a disagreement. Can we talk? Ask for the conversation, then be respectful. I know you've lived here a long time and you have expectations, and it's probably frustrating to have all these different people. And I really want to understand things from your perspective. Give him an opportunity to share what he's concerned about. After you've actively listened to that, make sure you got it all correct, repeat it back, then say, okay, can I tell you where I'm coming from? In other words, the roommate taught her how to have a respectful conversation where she listened to the other person, but also was able to share her own thoughts. And it worked out. It was communication, it was cooperation, it was respectful. It was all these things that humans have to learn because human connection is vital, because humans are key. And we don't have to like all humans, and all humans don't have to like us, but we do need some with whom we can be in community and in relationship, who have our back, who we can call in the middle of the night when something terrible happens. We all need that as a matter of survival and thriving. So we are definitely not meant to go on this journey alone. And being vulnerable, I think Ashley was ultimately one who took a deep breath and decided, instead of moving out, which felt safer, she took the scary step of facing this person with whom there was some conflict, daring to ask, daring to listen, daring to speak. And that vulnerability ultimately fostered a good connection.
Love that story.
Definitely a powerful message. And I want to highlight something that you slipped in there, that not every human has to like you.
Right.
I'm sure, including myself, there are many listeners who can maybe take that to heart a little bit. Not everyone's going to like you. It doesn't say anything about you. It just says something that there's 7 billion people. Right. And if 7 billion people like you, then there's probably something wrong with you because you're trying to please everybody.
Right.
So I just wanted to highlight that before I move on to the conclusion of this interview. And to anyone who's been fortunate enough to listen to the Mother's Quest podcast before, it is our challenge. So, Julie, as someone who has lived as full a life as one could live, definitely come across challenges of your own and overcome them, and has the wisdom to offer it back to us. I ask you, what is a challenge that you can give to our listeners to really live by the tenets of your turn and the topics of conversation that we've engaged with today?
And I will add that it's a challenge that Ryan and I will also take very seriously and do our best to fulfill.
Unless it's being on time. No problem.
So do you want an existential, like a big life-altering challenge, or do you want something small?
Oof, that is a decision, and I am not very good with those. So I will pass this over to my mom.
Well, I say, how can one say no to a life-altering challenge and choose smallness? Let's go with life-altering for 1,000.
I love it. You got to ask yourself, you two do, I do, everyone listening does, what do I want to do with this one wild and precious life? Here I'm quoting the late poet Mary Oliver, who said in one of her poems, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? So in that space of this is your, not anyone else's, one, not multiple, wild and precious life, what are you going to do? You then ask yourself, what would I do if it was only up to me? What would I study if I'm headed to school? What classes would I take if it was just up to me and if it was just about my enjoying what I was studying? What would I do if nobody else's opinion existed or mattered? If it's work, what would I do? What do I know I want this work life to be about? And for work, it's got to be this intersection of what you're good at and you love. Can't just be what you're good at, because if you're good at it and don't love it, you'll feel like a drone in your own life. And if you love it and aren't good at it and can't get better at it, you're not going to make a living from it, probably. So what would I do if it was just up to me? Often when we go to a quiet place, the shower, a walk in nature, time alone out in the hammock, if you have one, and you put the phone away, you put the music away, you put the email away, whatever the other daily regular distractions are, and you ask yourself, what is the work that brings me joy? Where are the places and spaces where I feel cherished and safe and seen? The inner voice will tell you answers. Well, of course I would do this, but who does that? Well, this goes back to me as a college dean when my students said, I'd be a wilderness naturalist, but who does that? I would pause and let the silence linger. Then I'd look at them and say, yeah, who does that? Many people do that. Maybe you, because they're looking for some permission from somebody because they hadn't yet learned they didn't need permission. But I would be that person saying, your feelings and needs and wants are valid. When are you going to realize that? So that's the challenge. Ask yourself the question, what would I be studying or doing for work, or with whom would I be in relationship? Whatever, is that sort of that realm you want to work on. If it was just up to me, if literally no one else's opinion mattered, what would I be pursuing? Not in life for the rest of my life, but now, for the next 6 months, for the next year, for the next 3 years, some time frame that feels appropriate given your age. Ask yourself that question and be willing to be curious about what you hear back from yourself, and maybe to explore a thing or two in furtherance of that thing being more likely.
Well, definitely on the existential side, but thank you for that challenge. Thank you for all the conversations we've had. I think we've touched on the topic of self-awareness before in this interview, and it's one of the most important things you can do, because if you're not aware of yourself, how can you present yourself to others? So I hope this challenge does resonate with the listeners, and I will pass it off to my mom to close off because this is her podcast.
That Mary Oliver quote is one of my absolute favorites, Julie. And I love this challenge. And as I was listening to you talk about it, as I move us into the closing acknowledgments, tears were coming to my eyes again, because I was feeling so appreciative that I am getting to do exactly what I want to do in my one wild and precious life right now. I could not imagine anything more important, powerful, or inspiring to me than getting to press pause on all the busyness and to be in this beautiful conversation and reflection with someone like you, and exponentially more beautiful to share it with you, Ryan. So thank you. I am leaving this conversation. It's funny, I mentioned that this is my year of becoming 50, but this theme about becoming ourselves as really the foundation of adulthood, and as something that does not end at a certain age. It doesn't miraculously begin necessarily at 18 and it doesn't end. I'm really holding that it is this ongoing journey of discovery and of change and of growth and releasing perfectionism and getting closer and closer to our own authenticity. So thank you for deepening my awareness of all of that, and also for modeling how we can truly honor the full range of who we are, including our neurodiversity, and modeling how I can demonstrate that by using curiosity with my own child. Thank you.
Thank y'all. I mean, my goodness, I have the privilege of being on a lot of podcasts, and particularly with a new book out. I think I've been on more than 60 podcasts in the last 3 months. And this was, of course, I hope you can appreciate this, but it has to be said, this was such a unique interview, in part, Julie, because of how you construct the Mother's Quest podcast in general. But let's be real. Ryan, you're the game changer. Having you here today, somebody who is a young adult, who can speak for yourself, but also more broadly, you're giving us a glimpse into how we might be in conversation with the young adults in our lives. It was just a game changer to have you as part of this conversation. So thank you for making the effort. Thank you for making the time to join me and your mom today. I really appreciate it. And I think listeners are probably like, wow, that Ryan, my goodness.
Wow, thank you. I'm speechless. I'm humbled, and I'm not very good at being humble, so that's something. I'm grateful to be on here too. I've heard so much about you, Julie, from my mom, and how impressive you are too. So it's been a privilege to speak to you and have that bit of writing mentoring, which I will take with me and have a 75% chance of doing, if I'm being honest. But yeah, thank you so much. So happy to be on here. Hopefully people who are listening, learn. There's a lot to be gained from here, and life isn't going to be perfect, but do your best, be nice to yourself, and if you're different, good for you. You're lucky.
Exactly. Exactly. Let's leave it there. My goodness, that was powerful.
And to hell with them. Here.
Let's pop on video to say a quick goodbye. And then I know, Ryan, you have to run.
Was great. My gosh.
I should have had a tissue box. I seriously was crying during most of the interview. So glad it worked out for you to be here, Ryan. That was incredible. And just such an honor to spend this time with both of you.
Happy to be here. And thank you too, Mom. Every time I'm on here, I get more appreciation for you and what you're doing and the network you've created. And I would like to apologize for holding the societal capitalistic belief that money makes your life and value. I joke with you a lot about the money you make, but I'm learning that that's not all it is. So I apologize, and I'll try to get better with that. And I appreciate what you're doing. So,
holy shit, we should have had that on the podcast.
Well, it's all recording.
Oh, good. I'm glad. This could be like the afterwards.
The after party as well.
Yeah, no, because for parents to hear that exchange is so valuable. Ryan, good for you for being able to be that transparent and clear. And
thank you.
Yeah, that now I'm, we're all having our tearful moments. That was so beautiful.
Thank you so much for coming along with me on this episode of the Mother's Quest podcast. I hope this conversation sparked something that will help you live your epic life. If you'd like to get show notes and learn more about how to join the Mother's Quest community, visit mothersquest.com. And while you're there, I would love it if you would follow the prompts to subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts, and help us to spread the word. I want to end with some words to help light the way on your quest. Seize the day, love your people, honor your gifts. Until next time.